Welcome, climate viewers. My name is Jim Lee from ClimateViewer News at climateviewer.com, climateviewer.org, and weathermodificationhistory.com. It is September 17th, 2018, and for the last time, geoengineering is already banned. It is illegal. I've heard this a million times, let's ban geoengineering. People really don't understand the history of climate intervention, weather modification, geoengineering, or any of this stuff. And there was a post earlier on Facebook about some hearings that happened back in 2009, 2010, and it really struck a chord with me, and I figured I should do a little educational piece on this. So I put together an article today. Geoengineering is banned, but they keep trying, funding climate intervention. And in this article, I go through the entire history of the legal background of geoengineering and weather modification, and how they have been trying for a very long time to get federal funding, because it's all about that dollar. And they've failed all along the way. So as you can see, pretty lengthy article here. Going to have a whole lot of references for you guys to dig through. I'm going to scroll through real quick, but we're going to go through it step by step, starting right now. So what am I talking about? Well, this is called the Convention for Biological Diversity, and this is specifically from 2012. And if you look right about here in section W, let me blow this up so you guys can see it really well. What you're going to see is that no climate-related geoengineering activities that may affect biodiversity take place until there is adequate scientific basis on which to justify such activities and appropriate consideration of blah, blah, blah happens. So, for the record, geoengineering was banned in 2012 by the Convention for Biological Diversity. Also, for the record, the United States did not sign this piece of paper. So, that's just first and foremost. I'm always of the notion that bans do not work. Trust but verify. Even though geoengineering is already banned, that does not mean that, parties will abide by it. And we'll just go into the history of that and explain why. Now I'm over here on weathermodificationhistory.com going through a couple timeline entries. Operation Popeye, Motor Pool, Intermediary Compatriot, Weather Warfare over Vietnam. This was from 1967 to 72, and basically the Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and the CIA were involved in illegal weather modification over Laos and Vietnam, and their goals were to soften road surfaces, cause landslides along roadways, and basically keep the Ho Chi Minh Trail unpassable. So that happened. And simultaneously, the CIA Project Nile Blue rain embargo on Cuban sugar crops, 69-70, the seeding near Cuba was to cause less rain, not more. It was supposed to squeeze rain out of clouds before they reached the island. You might say we tried to embargo rain clouds. References on that down at the bottom, CIA.gov, and a whole bunch of others. But newspaper articles galore, another CIA plot, because the CIA was also involved in the Vietnam weather warfare. Well, this led to the Weather Modification Reporting Act of 1972. And this is law on the books, and as you can see, it's Public Law 92-205. House Rule 6893, and this was passed in December 18th of 1971. And what this basically did was require, from this point forward, that anybody who modifies the weather over America fill out a form and send it to NOAA. And you can actually see those forms down here. Lots of references. That's what weather modification history is about. Weather modification activities to be reported. Reporting regulations published. Now must be reported to NOAA. And here are the 2 forms that you must fill out in order to modify the weather over America. You have an initial report on weather modification activities, followed up by an interim activity report and final report. And it says like number of days you did it, what you were trying to do, increase precipitation, alleviate hail or fog, or other. Just check other if you're up to nefarious stuff, I guess. Hours of operation by apparatus, airborne or ground-based. Type and amount of agent used: silver iodide, carbon dioxide, that's CO2, that's dry ice, urea, that's pee-pee, urine, or fertilizer, sodium chloride, that's salt, and then other, like if you're using cloud ionization techniques, things like that, steering lightning bolts with lasers, all of that sort of stuff. So you have to actually fill out these 2 forms to modify the weather in America. And that happened because of the weather warfare over Vietnam becoming public. I have mapped out all of those reports over here on ClimateViewer.org. You can actually see those reports, company, project, who's doing it, when they did it, why they did it. And as you can see, like this is year 2012. Let's do one from California. Snowpack augmentation, San Joaquin River, funded operator Atmospherics Incorporated, funding source Southern California Edison Company. You also see Pacific Gas and Electric, but I also have all of these in a Google Fusion table, and in it you can see all of the same information, when it occurred, where it occurred, who paid for it, who did it. The list goes on and on. Bark and fog operations on behalf of Delta Airlines, fog suppression. So from that point forward, 1972, these reports had to be filled out, and you can actually see, who's actually paying for it. Desert Research Institute, state of Nevada paid for it. Snowpack augmentation, putting snow on top of mountaintops. So right after that, there was the National Weather Modification Policy Act of 1976. And the purpose was to authorize the Secretary of Commerce to develop a national policy on weather modification for other purposes, be it enacted by the Senate, House, Representative, United States of American Congress assembled, that this act may be cited as the National Weather Modification Policy Act of 1976. Lists and details on that. All of this is in the article that I referenced. It's in the details at the top of this video. I hope that you guys will go through it. Where were we? Moving along. Then we had the Environmental Modification Warfare Act, the Environmental Modification Convention Weather Warfare Ban. So after that, there was a series of hearings, 2 of which are cited on this article, one of which is still top secret to this day. But basically it covers hostile weather modification. It does not ban all weather modification, desiring to prohibit effectively military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. So specifically in the language, each party in the convention undertakes not to engage in military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques having widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects as the means of destruction, damage, or injury to any other state party. So this was, weather warfare was banned in 1978 as a result of what happened over Vietnam. That is law. That's United Nations law. That's the one that I'm actually trying to get updated. Moving along. Weather Modification Research and Technology Transfer Authorization Act of 2005. This was put up for bid by Mark Udall, a Democrat. and it failed. House Rule 2995 from the 109th Congress, first session, to establish the Weather Modification Operations and Research Board and for other purposes. This bill failed, so it was not made legal. Coming up next, we have, in 2008, the Department of Homeland Security Hurricane Modification Workshop. And this was, the DHS getting together saying, hey, we want to prevent another Katrina. Let's try to make this legal. So the Department of Homeland Security obviously put together some funds to make this happen. And there was actually a Senate hearing associated with it. And it was called Weathering the Storm, the Need for a National Hurricane Initiative. And you can see this, Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, United States Senate, July 28, 2009. So there's another hearing on geoengineering hurricanes, because believe it or not, they call that climate mitigation. Moving along. Then we had the Weather Mitigation Research and Development Policy Authorization Act of 2009. And this was put together by K. Bailey Hutchinson, if I do recall. And it also failed. This was March 16th, 2009, reported by Mr. Rockefeller. Oh, don't get me started. But regardless, they tried to get federal funding for weather modification once again in 2009, and that failed. Was not passed. So then finally we come to the most important one, the joint US-UK Inquiry on Geoengineering House hearings. Now, there were 4 of these total. Geoengineering assessing the implications of large-scale climate intervention from November 2009. Then over in the UK, the regulation of geoengineering. This was held in the Margaret Thatcher Room at the Parliament. Geoengineering House of Commons Science Technology Committee, 2010, January. February 2010, back over in America, Geoengineering 2, the Scientific Basis and Engineering Challenges. And finally in March, Geoengineering 3, Domestic and International Research Governance. Now what you're going to notice is, at the very first one, Geoengineering Assessing the Implications of Large-Scale Climate Intervention, witness testimony by Dr. Ken Caldera, Mr. John Shepard, Mr. Lee Lane, Dr. James Roger Fleming. I interviewed him at the Weather Modification Conference this year. He's the world's top historian on geoengineering and weather modification. And Dr. Alan Robach. So these guys all went up to Congress and testified. And you can see all of those videos right here. So these have been up on my YouTube channel for many years. Despite being on my YouTube channel for many years, they've only got like 2,000 views because nobody knows about it. You can see published December 3rd, 2012. Many people to this day do not even know that these hearings occurred. So that was something that was posted on my Facebook earlier today, and I figured I'd shine some light on all of that. But there were 4 hearings total. This is the regulation of geoengineering from the Thatcher Room.
Good morning, David. Happy New Year to you. I'm very well indeed.
And as you can see, there's a small group of people and people testifying about geoengineering. And then part 2.
I'll explain to our guests and witnesses that we are expecting a vote at about a series of votes. I wish it were just one, but at about 10:15. The way the votes work is we have about 15 minutes to get over there, but that never is real, so you have 25 minutes.
They are wholly distinct.
Oh, is that
with respect to the science
David
and
Keith?
technology required to deploy and test them, with respect to their costs and environmental risks, and with respect to the challenges they pose for public policy and governance.
And then finally, part 3, more witness testimony.
Required careful consideration And we decided, as part of a dovetailing exercise with your committee, to take on that challenge and move the debate on the regulation of geoengineering a little further.
And that all happened. Most people to this day do not know that any of these hearings even occurred. So what's really ironic about these hearings is that, you know, I have another article, Jim Lee versus Geoengineering, Public Refuses SRM Proposals. This is from 2014. But as a result of me posting that video you just saw on YouTube, Ken Caldera and his buddies over on their geoengineering group found out about it. Congressional Committee hearing, Geoengineering 1, assessing the implications of large-scale climate intervention. Andrew Lockley, who is Ken Caldera's geoengineering forum moderator, posted a link to my YouTube video. And Russell Seitz said, "This is 3 years old!" exclamation point. And, you know, so basically, Ken Caldera never even posted this on his own forum when these hearings happened, which tells you a lot because his forum is filled with geoengineering scientists. They were even unaware that the hearing had happened. You know, it says this video was put up. This is classic. Okay, this is how I met Ken Caldera back in 2012 and started debating him. This video, November 5th, 2009, was just put up a few days ago by Mr. Jim Lee. Looking, this will lead you to 2 more hearings from the same period. We may not see any more hearings for 2 to 3 years, but this is my favorite line ever. As I followed this thread, I learned that Mr. Jim Lee is clearly opposed to geoengineering. I could find no comments by him on biochar, but he endorsed the work by the ETC group, which is a group who is opposed to biochar, relying on the research by only one other group. I am sorry to report that Mr. Lee is apt to be quite active and influential in opposing all parts of geoengineering. He has a big site. So at this point, you know, I had just uploaded this video of the hearing. And of course, you know, my friends on Twitter came running over and they're like, "Dude, they're talking about you on the on Ken Caldera's group." So what I did was, in the article I just published today, I put all of my postings from that group. So I went on to debate Ken Caldera and you know, Stephen Salter, John Latham, all of this back in 2012. Most of you guys have never read any of this stuff. The "you don't have all the variables" argument. How will the geoengineers address the statements of the AMS, WMO, and National Research Council on weather modification? This one in black is still to this day the second most viewed post on his entire forum ever, because it lays out a legal argument against geoengineering. If you cannot prove the scientific efficacy of cloud seeding after 60 years, how do you ever plan on pulling off geoengineering on a worldwide basis? And all of these are my several, you know, posts that I was a part of. CIA backed $630,000 study into how to control the weather. I suggest you read through these forum posts, because these are the actual geoengineering scientists I was debating at the time. And this was from 2012 through about 2014, before I finally left the group after warning that they would probably end up getting tarred and feathered, which was a quote from Asilomar. They didn't really think it was very funny. But regardless, moving along. Congressional hearing on geoengineering, innovation, research, and technology, November 8th, 2017. So they finally had another hearing. Some of these names, you know, they're very familiar to me, probably not to you, but you can see the video on that. Once again, looks familiar, same old deal, you know.
Climate change is happening, and the effects are accelerating faster than the scientific models predict. The changes we are experiencing today are the results of heating that has taken place over the past decades.
Blah, blah, blah about global warming.
To fight the impacts of climate change. These strategies come in the form of bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration, direct air capture technologies, enhanced geological weathering, and land use management, just to name a few.
And spraying chemicals all over the sky in order to block out sunlight. So they've been trying for years to get funding for weather modification and geoengineering. I have a very lengthy article, Weather Modification Laws in the United States of America, which will go through each state by state, including the Convention for Biological Diversity's law banning it. Countries agree to ban geoengineering, what the UN ban on geoengineering really means. At the UN, groups push for geoengineering moratorium. The Space Preservation Act, where they actually said the word chemtrails in it, and all of the different laws that I said. Interestingly enough, if you scroll down here to the bottom, Washington State, just to give you an example of a law that's actually on the books in America. Title 43, Chapter 4337, Weather Modification. These are the exemptions. You are exempt from reporting the weather modification activities in the state of Washington if the department, to the extent it deems practical, shall provide by regulation for exempting from all license, permit, and liability requirements. 1. Research and development and experiments by state and federal agencies, institutions of higher learning, and bona fide nonprofit research organizations. Are you kidding me? No liability, no license, no permit, exempt from all reporting. Number 2, laboratory research and experiments. And number 3, activities of an emergent character for the protection against fire. Anybody want to talk about West Coast fires? Frost, sleet, or fog, and activities normally engaged in for purposes other than those of inducing, increasing, decreasing, or preventing precipitation or hail. So,